The dome is real. There are lots of proofs we live under a dome. Sundogs, halos, rainbows, and star trails all prove this. You can't have a vacuum resting next to a pressurized atmosphere without a barrier. Even NASA admits they can no longer leave low Earth orbit, but they could in 1969? Well, this is a series where I take a look at one of the flat Earth flyer and discuss/debunk one section at a time. So far we covered water is a natural level, airplane level flights, science says is stationary, horizon is always eye level, and we see too far. Today is the dome. The thinking behind it is, you can't have a vacuum next to a non-vacuum without a barrier. In our day-to-day, we even see where different air pressure tries to equalize without a barrier, like a balloon. Thus, there must be a barrier above us, and this barrier is dome. Exactly what this looks like varies by who is theorizing. But many flat earther believers say that walls of ice surround the edge of the disk, and that the planets, moons, and stars hover in a sort of dome-shaped firmament above Earth, much closer to Earth than they really are. Various phenomena like halos, rainbows, and so on proves this existence of dome. Furthermore, as it is a barrier, we cannot go past it. Even NASA admits they can't leave low Earth orbit. Case closed, right? The whole argument, in essence, hangs on the fact of vacuum resting next to a pressurized atmosphere without a barrier, and thus the existence of dome. Let's understand that. We all know that the space is empty. Well, mostly empty, and thus is almost a vacuum. Then we have our globe Earth's atmosphere. So how do they exist next to each other? Well, the simple answer starts with gravity. This force pulls everything towards the center of the mass, or our Earth's center. This force diminishes over distance, thus it becomes like a gradient. Now air molecules nearer to the ground is affected more to this force than the ones higher up. On top of that, that's a funny sentence, because here, the molecules nearer the ground has all the other molecules above it literally on top of it. And as we move higher, those molecules has less molecules above it. This all results to air having a higher atmospheric pressure nearer the ground and gets lower and lower as you go higher up. Next, we need to talk about escape velocity. If you throw a rock up at the sky, it will rise up and then fall down thanks to gravity. Now, if you threw it a bit harder, it would rise up higher before falling down. If you could throw it fast enough, that rock would just escape the gravity of the planet. That initial velocity is escape velocity. In the Newton's law of gravity chapter, formula for this escape velocity is found. In essence, the closer you are towards the center of the Earth, the higher the escape velocity needs to be. But at greater heights above the planet's surface, well, this velocity is lower. Finally, we need to talk about temperature. As the temperature increases, a solid turns into a gas when the particles are moving fast enough to break free from the chemical bonds that held them together. And from that, the particles in a hotter gas would move quicker than those in a cooler gas of the same type. This is fun. So we need an escape velocity that gets lower and lower depending how high we are. Depending on the temperature, the air molecules are traveling at different speed. And when we say air, well, air is really a mixture of different gases. And surprise, surprise, Larger gas molecules move slower on average than lighter gas molecules. For example, carbon dioxide molecules move slower on average than hydrogen molecules at the same temperature. And remember that pressure? Well, it really means how dense those molecules are. Well, that also means as the pressure decreases, the distance between the atoms and molecules are so far apart that they can travel hundreds of kilometers without colliding into each other. How freaking cool is that? At the end, it's mostly hydrogen and helium that wins and manages to escape to space. So we have our planet's gravity holding onto the atmosphere and losing some gases in the space. That is basically what it is. There is no dome needed. If we take the dome out of the equation, can we explain sundogs, halos, rainbows, and star trails? Glad you asked. Let's start with halo. If you see halo around normal light source like a headlight, please go and see an optometrist, as you might be developing an eye condition. Hey, that's my goodwill for the week, but I'm being serious. At times we observe a large ring or circle of light around sun or moon. Scientists call them 22-degree halos, as the ring has a radius of approximately 22 degrees around the sun or moon. Well, this type of halo is caused by either cirrus clouds or cirrostratus clouds. These are clouds formed by ice crystals high up in the sky, starting from 6 km. And yes, it gets rather cold up there, starting from minus 24.59 degrees centigrade. The halos we see are caused by both refraction or splitting of light and also by reflection or glints of light from these ice crystals. The crystals have to be oriented and positioned just so with respect to our eye in order for the halo to appear. That's why, like rainbows, halos around the sun or moon are personal. Everyone sees their own particular halo made by their own particular ice crystals, which are different from the ice crystals making the halo of the person standing next to you. There's an old weather folklore. Ring around the moon means rain soon. While that is not always the case, it often is actually true. Cirrus clouds typically move into an area well ahead of a storm system that may cause rain in the next day or so. Now, I don't understand how a halo proves a dome. If it is not ice crystal refraction and reflection, then is it just light reflecting off the dome? In which case, should we not see it all the time? Next, the halo is always a 22 degree. Does that not also mean that the distance between the light source and the dome is the same when observed? Then should that not be predictable? We should be able to see a halo at the same time from the same place all the time. And if it is the reflection from the dome, then please explain why it appears different to the person next to us. Maybe God's firmament has some magical properties. Next is sundog. As it belongs to the same family as halo, it made more sense to talk about halo first. Sundog is an atmospheric optical phenomena that consists of a bright spot to one or both sides of the sun. Two sundogs often flank the sun within, you guessed it, a 22-degree halo. Sundog appears at the same altitude above the horizon as the sun. They can be seen anywhere in the world during any season, but are not always obvious or bright. Sundogs are best seen and most conspicuous when the sun is nearer the horizon. A common guess for the name is, as this spot sits beside the sun, it's almost like a dog sitting next to his master, and thus sundog. The shape and orientation of the ice crystals through which the light passes determines the type of halo you will see. Only ice crystals that are flat and hexagonal, known as plates, can create halos. If the majority of these plate-shaped ice crystals are positioned with their flat sides horizontal to the ground, you will see a sundog. If the crystals are positioned at a mix of angles, your eyes will see a circular halo without the distinct dogs. Thus, sundog is more common during winter months. We need cold enough clouds like cirrus or cirrostratus to make the necessary plate-shaped ice crystals. We also get similar crystals drifting in freezing moist air at low levels as diamond dust. Then we need these plates to drift in the air with their hexagonal faces horizontal to the ground. Similar to a leaf falling, these plates would wobble back and forth. Light hits the crystal and passes through their side faces. The crystal acts like a prism and separates the light into its component color wavelengths as the light enters it. Still separated into its range of colors, the light continues traveling through the crystal until it bends again at a 22-degree angle upon exiting the crystal's other side. These same plate-shaped ice crystals are also responsible for the colorful circumzenithal arc, meaning that these two types of halo tend to co-occur. The latter is often missed by viewer since it's located more or less directly overhead. Another halo variety often seen together with sundogs is our 22-degree halo discussed earlier. If I have to think of a dome causing the sundog, then my assumption would be the position of the sundog is where the dome ends. Then what is the landscape doing outside the dome? Is there people living there? Do they know they are outside the dome as well like us? This is a Simpsons movie, right? Next is rainbows. Is there a pot of gold waiting? This is so similar to sundog, as both is being separated into component color wavelengths, though in reverse. Well, for rainbow to be observed, the sun is behind the observer's position and is no more than 42 degrees above the horizon. The rain or water drops are floating in the air in front of the observer, and finally the sky is clear enough of clouds for the rainbow to be seen. As raindrops are formed, due to surface tension, it starts as a roughly spherical structure, but as it falls, due to the airflow, it loses that round shape and becomes more like a burger bun, with flattened near the bottom and a carved dome top. So for the halo, we had a flat hex-shaped plate, where in rainbow we get a bun. Great. Then the light shines on a raindrop. It starts with refraction. Now the prism effect. As the visible light is made up of different color wavelengths, when it refracts, the different color wavelengths are separated. Still separated into its range of colors, the light continues traveling through the water until it reflects off the back of the droplet and exits the opposite end of it at a 42-degree angle. As it exits the water droplet, it is refracted once again. Apply this process to a whole collection of raindrops in the sky, and voila, we have a rainbow. Since raindrops are relatively circular in shape, the reflection they create is also curved, and the lower the sun is to the horizon, the more of the curve we're able to see. Sometimes light hits the back of the raindrop twice instead of just once. This re-reflected light exits the drop at a different angle, resulting in a secondary rainbow, which appears above the primary bow. This is known as double rainbows. Similarly, depending on how many times it got reflected. Remember, it is not a perfect circle. We can get triple or quadruple rainbows, though they're extremely rare. I find it hard to understand how rainbow proves a dome. Is it because of the curve? If that is the case, then why is rainbow only visible when the sun is behind us? I'm surprised that they left out sun pillar. This is a shaft of light extending vertically above the sun, most often at sunrise or sundown. You also need cirrus cloud. I wonder why. Finally, star trails. So the argument here is, Earth rotates around its own axis, then it orbits the Sun. The Sun itself is spiraling around the Milky Way, where the galaxy itself is rocketing through the universe. And yet we find ancient sundials that can still reliably tell time. Further, if we consider all the constellations and the countless descriptions from ancient description are exactly the same as in present days. If the Earth and the stars are all shooting through the universe, then the stellar body should not be as unchanging as they are. In fact, we should have a different, constantly changing night sky with some stars moving faster than others. If you look at Polaris that is so far away, it should have a trajectory of its own, and Polaris can be seen as far as south as 20 degrees south latitude and even farther. So that's the summary. Pretty compelling, wouldn't you say? Well, you know what I think one of our problems is? Most of us, we don't comprehend large numbers. I'll give an example. 1000 minutes is only 16.6 hours. But 1 million minutes? Well, it is 1.9 years. How about 1 billion minutes? Brace for it. It is 1902 years. One of the earliest civilizations we know of are the Aboriginal Australians, who can trace their ancestry back to about 75,000 years ago. That is a long time ago. Guess how old the Earth is? It is estimated to be 4.54 billion years old, plus or minus about 50 million years. Our existence is a speck of dust, even when comparing to just Earth. Forget the galaxy or the universe. Next, Earth is rotating at a blistering speed of 1609 km per hour. That is fast. Faster than any commercial flight that cruises around 926 km per hour. Nice. Earth's orbital speed is a bit higher. We travel at 107,000 km per hour. That is over 66 times faster than rotation speed. Wow! And Earth does it remarkably well. In fact, it does it so well that we use the shadow from the apparent travel of Sun to create a device, one of the oldest known instruments for telling time. Used by the Babylonians and ancient Greeks, this is sundial. The fact the Earth is a very accurate clock, rotating at a constant speed, is the reason up to 1972 it was the international standard for timekeeping, until the atomic clock took over. So yeah, sundials are still pretty accurate. Now remember that super fast orbital speed of 107,000 km per hour? Well, compare that to the speed of light, which is a measly 1.08 billion km per hour. When we talk about stellar body, we mostly can't comprehend how far they truly are. We estimate Polaris to be only 323 light years away. Only. So if Polaris got destroyed right now, it would take us 323 years to find out. In the Great Pyramid of Giza, some mysterious shafts were recognized as being aligned with stars or areas of sky as the sky appeared for the pyramid's builder 5,000 years ago. As you see, 5,000 years ago, it was Tuban, a relatively inconspicuous star in the constellation Draco the Dragon, was the pole star when the Egyptians were building the pyramids. On March 24, year 2100, Polaris would be 0.4525 degrees from the North Celestial Pole. In year 4000, we would be calling Erie our North Star. Fast forward to 7500. That honor would belong to Elderamin, that is, if we manage to last that long. Polaris being seen from as far as south as 20 degrees south latitude is a blatant lie. Although Polaris is known as the North Star, it has a declination of 89.34 degrees. The difference is 0.66 degree. Would be Polaris's peak altitude if viewed from the equator, and the latitude south of the equator from which the star would scrape the horizon, if Earth had no atmosphere. But our atmosphere refracts starlight, causing the object near the horizon to appear higher than it really is. Under typical atmospheric condition, this adds 0.57 degree to an object's altitude, so Polaris would barely show up from 1.23 degree south latitude. But to be fair, in 12,600 years, Polaris will be visible anywhere north of 45.95 degree south latitude. So maybe this is referring to that point? Our lifetime is just a dust in cosmic time. Finally, NASA admission. This statement is based from an interview with NASA astronaut Don Pettit. Well, let's see that snippet.
I'd go to the moon in a nanosecond. The problem is we don't have the technology to do that anymore. We used to, but we destroyed that technology, and it's a painful process to build it back again.
Unfortunately, I have no real way of debunking that statement. All I can do is assume what he is saying, as I have no way of knowing what he thought he meant. In that statement, flat earthers assume technology means the knowledge, i.e., to invent useful things to solve problems. So if I point to my phone and say it is a piece of technology, I might be talking about the cumulative knowledge from electronics, semiconductor to nanotechnology that was needed to achieve this final goal. Or I might be talking about it as a piece of equipment or methods like factories to create such device. We know NASA no longer has the rockets, factories, equipments, etc. from the original Apollo missions, but we still have all the necessary knowledge and know-how. In fact, we just sent a bloody rover to Mars that should hopefully land on the red planet on 18th of February 2021. So a rational person would assume that Mr. Pettit was using this word as a method and not technology. The Saturn V rocket had over 3 million parts. The command and service modules and lunar modules were composed of millions of additional parts. This was a vehicle destined to go to the moon and needed little tolerance for imprecision and error. Thousands and thousands of hours went into testing and tweaking for Saturn V. We do not have the development and operations team that acquired that experience. When the Apollo program ended, the factories that assembled those vehicles were retasked or shut down. The jigs were deassembled. The technicians, engineers, scientists, and flight controllers moved on to other jobs. Over time, some of the materials used became obsolete. If we say, let's build another Saturn V rocket, well, it is not simply pulling out the blueprints. We don't have the factories or tools. We don't have the materials. We don't have the expertise to understand how the real vehicle differed from the drawings. We don't have the expertise to operate the vehicle. We would have to substitute modern materials. That changes the vehicle. It changes the mass. It changes the stresses and strains. It changes the interaction. It changes the possible malfunctions. It changes the capabilities of the vehicle. We would also have to spend a few years redeveloping the expertise. You would have to conduct new tests and simulations. You would have to draft new flight rules and procedures. We would have to certify new flight controllers and crew. I hope this explains why I'm with the group who thinks Don Pettit referred to it as a method. Well, that's all for this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you have enjoyed this content, well, a like and a comment won't go amiss. If you'd also subscribe for future contents like this, it would definitely help my small channel grow and would be thoroughly appreciated. Have a safe day. Signing off.